is the video for section 5.5 part 2, and you already have the notes for this. We're going to start, I know we haven't done examples 3 parts A and B yet, where we're supposed to write each expression in quadratic form. I'm going to skip this part for right now, and we're going to go over this in class on Monday after we go over the rest of this. So leave this blank for right now, and then we're going to come back to it. So we're going to start with example 4. Remember the first part of this lesson, we learned how to factor the sum and difference of cubes, and we just practiced factoring. So the rest of these problems we want to solve, and we're going to solve by factoring. So the things that we need to remember is if we have two terms, okay, that's probably going to be the difference of cubes, or the sum of cubes, or the difference of squares. If I have 4 or more terms, then I know I'm probably going to have to factor by grouping. But if I just have 3 terms right here, this is a trinomial, then I can probably factor this using my box, just like we always have, okay? So the very first thing we're going to do on example 4 is look and see, can I factor something out first? All right, so between 18, 21, and 3, I can factor out a 3. So I'm going to say, all right, factor out a 3, and I would have 6x to the 4th minus 7x squared plus 1 left. Now I need to factor this. Well, I'm going to factor this using my box. Okay, and we've done lots of problems where we factored using our box method. I'm going to put this first term, 6x to the 4th, and the only difference is we're used to seeing this as an x squared instead of x to the 4th. This last term right here goes in this last box. We always multiply these together, and I get 6x to the 4th. And I need factors of 6x to the 4th that when I add them, I get a negative 7x squared. Okay, so to get a negative 7x squared, I have to have a negative 6x squared and a negative 1x squared. Okay, because when I add these together, I get negative 7x squared, but when I multiply them together, I get positive 6x to the 4th. So again, the difference here, we're used to just having x's here and here, but since this is x to the 4th, I'm going to have x squared and x squared. So these two numbers are going to go in my other two remaining boxes. It doesn't matter which ones. Okay, and I am going to factor out what I can. So going this way, I don't have anything in common, so it's going to be a 1. Going this way, they have an x squared in common. Going up and down, they have a 6x squared in common. And going up and down this way, they have a 1. All right, now my signs are the same and they're supposed to be minus. So sometimes whenever that happens, I don't actually have a negative that I factored out, but we need to check our signs. I know my signs are the same and they're both minus. So I have this 3 sticking out here. I have my x squared minus 1, and I have 6x squared minus 1 equals 0. And now we're going to set each factor equal to 0 and solve. So 3 equals 0. That doesn't even make sense, so I don't have to do that. I'm going to say x squared minus 1 equals 0. And 6x squared minus 1 equals 0. Now, if you looked at this and said, hey, that's the difference of squares, and you factored it again, then that's okay. You can do that. All right, but if I don't recognize that and I just set that factor equal to 0 and solve, I'm still going to get the answers that I need. So I'm going to solve for this. I have x squared equals 1. And then to solve for this, I have to take the square root of both sides. So I get x equals, and on today's lesson, we need to make sure we put a plus or minus, and then the square root of 1 is 1. So that's 2 answers. And now I need to solve for this one. I'm going to add 1 to both sides, so I have 6x squared equals 1. Divide by 6, and I get x squared equals 1/6. Take the square root of both sides, and I have x equals plus or minus take the square root of 1, and that's 1. Take the square root of 6, and that's not a perfect square. Now, the rules are we can't have a square root on the bottom. So when we have a square root on the bottom, I need to multiply the top and bottom by square root of 6 over 6. So now my answer is plus or minus 1 times the square root of 6 is square root of 6. The square root of 6 times the square root of 6 is the square root of 36, or just 6. And that's my other two answers. Okay, so let's do another one. Example 5. All right, so first of all, can I factor anything out? They don't have anything in common, so I can't do anything. So I automatically am going to use my box. My first term is 4x to the 4th. My last term is 3. Multiply those together and I get 12x to the 4th. So I need factors of 12 that when I add them, I get negative 8x squared. So do you see that that's going to be 6x squared and 2x squared? And it's actually going to be negative, so I can have that negative. So I have negative 6x squared, negative 2x squared. Now I'm going to factor out what I can. Going left and right, it's a 3. Going left and right, it's a 2x squared. Going up and down, that would be, 2x squared. Going up and down would be 1. Now we already said our signs are the same and they're minus. So that's going to be 2x squared minus 3, 2x squared minus 1 equals 0. Now set each factor equal to 0. So when I solve this one, I get 2x squared equals 3. Divide by 2, and I get x squared equals 3 halves. Take the square root of both sides, and I get x equals the square root of 3 over the square root of 2, and there's a plus or minus out in front. The rules are I can't have a radical in the bottom, so I'm going to multiply the top and the bottom by the square root of 2. So I get plus or minus square root of 3 times the square root of 2 is the square root of 6. Square root of 2 times the square root of 2 is the square root of 4, or 2. So that's my answer for that one. Now I'm going to work this one. Okay, I'm going to add 1 to both sides. I'm going to write it over here. So I get 2x squared equals 1. Divide by 2. X squared equals 1 half. Take the square root of both sides, and I get x equals plus or minus. The square root of 1 is 1. The square root of 2 is just the square root of 2. I can't have a square root in the bottom, so I'm going to multiply the top and the bottom by the square root of 2 over 2. So I get plus or minus 1 times this is square root of 2. Square root of 2 times square root of 2 is 2. All right, last one. All right, and the last one, I can factor out a 2 first. So when I factor out a 2, I have 4x to the 4th plus 5x squared minus 6. Now I'm going to use my box. 4x to the 4th goes here, and my negative 6 goes here. When I multiply them together, I get negative 24x to the 4th. So I need factors of 24x to the 4th to get positive 5, this middle term. So would that be 8 and 3? And it's a positive 5, so it's going to be positive x squared and a negative 3x squared. So that's what's going to go in my two boxes, 8x squared negative 3x squared. Factor out what we can, so going left and right, it's a 2. Going left and right, it's an x squared. Going up and down, 4x squared. Going up and down, negative 3. So that's what's going to go in my boxes, or in my parentheses, x squared plus 2, 4x squared minus 3. Now I'm going to set each factor equal to 0. 2 can't equal 0, so I don't have to worry about that. X squared plus 2 equals 0, and 4x squared minus 3 equals 0. So now I'm going to set or subtract negative 2. And now I'm going to take the square root of both sides. So I get x equals plus or minus. Now, if you remember, I have the square root of a negative 2. I can't take the square root of a negative number, so that's going to be an I. And square root of 2 won't break down, so that's just the square root of 2. On this one, I'm going to solve by adding 3 to both sides. Divide by 4. X squared equals 3/4. Take the square root, and I get x equals plus or minus the square root of 3 over the square root of 4, but the square root of 4 is 2. Okay? So the problems that you're going to do for the second part, still on page 346, and you're going to do problems 11 through 14, and then 30 through 35. They're all factoring, and you're going to factor by either using your box, or if it can't be factored using your box and you only have two terms, then you need to factor it by either the sum or difference of cubes. Okay? I'll answer any questions you have in class.